everyone, Tiffany here with another cosplay tutorial, and on this one we're going to be going over how I made my Radiant Lightbringer armor belt from the game World of Warcraft. And here are my in-game reference images that I used to create the belt. I first started off by making a 2-scale blueprint of the belt, and it is available on my website www.tiffanygordoncosplay.com, or see the link below. And with the help of this blueprint, I then cut out of 10mm EVA foam these crescent moon-like shapes. These are going to be the base for making all of our 3-dimensional parts onto the side belt pieces. I then took these pieces to my workbench and sanded one side at a 45-degree angle. This would be the part that I attached to my next piece, and then on the other side I rounded it so that way it wouldn't be sharp. Then I heat treated all of the pieces using a heat gun, and then applied contact cement glue to a piece of 6mm EVA foam that I had cut out previously for the side belt pieces. And once the glue was dry, I attached these crescent moon pieces to it. I then repeated this process for a belt strap at the very top, cutting out of another piece of 6mm EVA foam and then attaching it with contact cement glue. The next step was to cut out these large rectangular sheets of 2mm EVA foam and heat treat the entire surface using a heat gun, and then I covered the entire back surface of it with contact cement glue. This is going to be the sheet of EVA foam that we cover the previous form with. It's going to make it so it looks like it's actual fabric that's floating over these pieces rather than sharp shapes coming out of a piece of EVA foam. And once all of the contact cement glue was dry, I then started to cover the form in the 2mm EVA foam. And as I went, I ended up using scissors to cut off of the extra 2mm EVA foam. And here is what the piece looks like after I used 2 sheets to cover the top surface. I will note that I did use a leather burnisher to help smooth out the EVA foam so it would lay flatter. And here is the before and after. To get rid of that ugly seam that was down the middle, I ended up using a sanding drum and smoothing it out as much as possible. And then I rounded off the edge using a sanding drum. To give the piece more shape to fit around my hips and waist, I ended up heat treating the entire surface with a heat gun, and while the EVA foam was still hot, I taped it in place. This way, when it cooled down, it would stay in the relative shape that it was at. Now back to that nasty seam. I ended up filling the crack with Quick Seal, the process of applying this filler with a craft stick, and while it is still wet, you use a wet paper towel to wipe up the extra bits. Please note that when Quick Seal dries, it's going to leave a more shiny surface. So if you were to paint directly over this, or even if you put Plasti-Dip on top and then paint on that, it's gonna be a bit shinier than any place that was just the EVA foam. Now to start adding details. I first cut out my 2mm EVA foam back sheet for these little side detail pieces, and then for the trim part of it, I cut out 6mm EVA foam. And to get really nice, crisp, clean edges, I ended up splitting it into 3 pieces so that way my sanding drum could reach all of the spots in the corners. Next, I went back to the workbench and sanded each of the edges at a 45-degree angle using the sanding drum, and then heat treated each piece using a heat gun. I then glued each piece together using contact cement glue, and you can see the before and after here, and then glued that piece to the 2mm EVA foam back piece. Now that both pieces of EVA foam are attached, I then went back and I sanded and rounded the edges so that way it would look more natural. I then traced where it would attach onto my EVA foam side pieces and applied contact cement glue to both pieces, making sure that each piece was dry before attaching them together. Next, I cut out the little belt straps from 4mm EVA foam and then rounded each of the pieces using a sanding drum, and also I rounded each of the holes using the sanding drum as well. And then heat treated each one of the belt straps using a heat gun. To attach each of the belt straps to the side belt pieces, I ended up tracing them where they would lay on the side pieces, and then I used contact cement glue to glue them to the piece. For the little ring things in the very center of each of the side belt pieces, I ended up taking a cardboard tube from ribbon spools, and then I wrapped it with 10mm EVA foam. And once the glue was dry from that, I then again took it to my workbench and rounded it so it looked more like a ring rather than a cutout disc thing. To attach the ring to the side belt pieces, I ended up doing the very bottom one first, marking it with Sharpies where it was going to lay and gluing it with contact cement glue. And once this piece was dry, I then went to the second one, repeated the same steps, and then went to the third one. For the middle belt buckle, I ended up cutting it out of 2 sheets of 4mm EVA foam followed by a backing of 2mm EVA foam. I then repeated the same steps of heat treating each piece, gluing them together, and then rounding all the edges using a sanding drum. I then marked on each of the side belt pieces where I wanted the belt buckle to lay, and then I applied contact cement glue to all 3 of these pieces, let dry, and then attached them together. And this is what it looks like once it's all put together. Now, because this is battle armor, it needs battle damage, so I ended up getting a little sanding disc and just marked the entire piece so it looked like it had been in a few fights. I then applied 4 heavy coats of Plasti-Dip to the entire piece. And speaking about painting, I first started off with my base coat of turquoise airbrush paint, followed by blue, and then I ended up adding a dark blue black color to all of the shadow areas. And once all that paint was dry, I then masked it off using masking tape and paper. I then did my base coat of yellow airbrush paint to the entire piece, followed by a brown, yellow, orange, and gold mix of color. I then went back in with a little bit of an orangey brown to add a little bit more shadowy tones, and then some yellow gold for some highlighted areas. And for even more pop, I then went in with a black-brown color around all of the deep shadow areas. When all the paint was dry, I then masked off those yellow painted areas with some more paper and masking tape, followed by a base coat of black airbrush paint, and then a silver gray color. And let's not forget about adding more shadows with a darker color of gray-black to all of the areas. And once again, I masked off all of those areas, leaving only the belt straps shown. For these, again I applied a base coat of black airbrush paint. This is to get rid of all of the previous colors from the airbrush paint that had accidentally sprayed onto these straps. And then I applied a brown color of airbrush paint, and then a dark brown-black color for shadowing. And here's what the piece looks like so far, after all of the masking tape and paper was removed. I then wanted each piece to pop just a little bit more with all of the vandal damage and some more shadowing, so I went by hand using black airbrush paint and painted in all the little detail spots. And once all the paint was dry, I then sealed the entire piece with satin clear enamel spray paint. The only step now was to attach my Velcro to the belt strap and the back of the side piece with contact cement glue, and then my belt was done! I hope you enjoyed this cosplay tutorial, and if so, remember to subscribe to the channel! Much love guys, and see you for the next video!